Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me that in life, you should not be scared of ghosts. Fear the living, because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with a realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in the light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car that he had willed to me to the cabin. Now, this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we were not using it. I had keys to the cabin and also had the code for the alarms, so I did not feel the need to stop at the rental and management company and advise them of my stay. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal and nothing out of the ordinary happened. Spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking, and smoking out in the balcony. Had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much shut in, aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as company and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of the time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into other parts and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he also since passed, playing games and watching DVDs. That day was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Tall, this is important later on. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. Around midday, while playing with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in a cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe there were shut-ins like me. The prints led away from my cabin and they disappeared in the snow towards the dense part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around and decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up in a standstill listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I stayed in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out and could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth. After about 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started doing his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash and try to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright. Maybe there are forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But I didn't want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing, the steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. At the time, I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself, so I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out to the balcony. As soon as I went outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird, must have been all in my head. What about midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and about 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between two branches. It was squatted on one branch and its arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above me. What the hell is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing and stood up staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of my room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. Later in the night, I heard light tapping on the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not to do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. Passed out eventually and woke up in the morning and everything was normal. The rest of the week I spent there was non-eventful and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. Never saw that thing again. A couple of years ago, two friends and I, we'll call them D and J, went to a place called Look Rock. It's a concrete observation tower at the top of Chalawi Mountain in Blount County, Tennessee. To get to the tower, you park in a small pull-off, then walk a paved trail half a mile up the mountain. I've been up to this tower many times, and there's usually some kind of energy in the air. You can't see it, but you can feel it. It's like the woods themselves had acquired sentience, and they're just barely tolerating your presence. Anyway, this particular trip was eerily quiet. Typically in the woods, you can hear woodsy sounds, cicadas, wind rustling in the trees, the occasional animal, but this night was silent. Going back to my simile, it's like the sentient woods were terrified of something and were paralyzed with fear. The trip up the mountain was uneventful, apart from the general air of creepiness. We went up to the tower and shot the proverbial shit for a couple of hours. Finally, around 3-ish, we decided it was time to wrap it up and we began the trip back down. At the base of the tower, there's a couple of flattish boulders, about 6 feet or so in diameter, placed as a decoration. What I saw on the boulder was the start of a terrifying night. Nobody else in my group noticed, but squatted on the boulder was a solid black form, about 4 to 5 feet tall, with deeply glowing red eyes. It stared at us for a second, then vanished into thin air. Assuming the eyes were just messing with me, I reluctantly carried on past the boulders. The feeling of uneasiness followed us up until about the 30% point. On this trail, there's a point where the trail turns 90 degrees to the right. The trail you're walking on continues forward, but it's just an ATV axis for the rangers. This is in the Smoky Mountain National Park. About 20 feet or so before the turn, I noticed an extra pair of footsteps. There was only 3 of us, but 4 sets of footsteps. I stopped and looked, and right behind Jay was a 7-foot tallish heat distortion. Like when you look over a flaming grill on a summer day. It was vaguely human-shaped. As with the form on the boulder, after looking at it for a few seconds, it vanished. At this point, we double-timed it back to the car. They hadn't seen it, but they felt it. Halfway down the trail, there's a spot where one tree has fallen into the split trunk of another tree, so it kind of forms a triangle against the ground. At the top of the triangle, the same crouched black form with deep red eyes. Again, it vanished after looking at it. We made it back down to the truck. Everything in our minds was screaming, "Run." We did about 90 miles per hour down Foothills Parkway until we made it back to the highway. From there, the trip was uneventful. We dropped Jay off to his house and proceeded to Dee's house, about 15 minutes away. As I was pulling out of Dee's driveway, his phone rang. He answered it, turned pale, and flagged me down. Something had happened at Jay's house. We booked it back to Jay's, where we found every light in his house on. We went in and found him in bed, with a Bible in one hand and a .45 in the other. Jay's bedroom faces a streetlight. Also in his room, he has a nightlight, a clock, and a stereo, all which keep his room fairly well lit. He went to bed, then the room suddenly went dark. He could not see the streetlight, the clock, the stereo, etc. And they were still there, but they cast no glow into the room. He said he couldn't even see his hand in front of his face. He went on to say that something had put its hands on his throat and growled in his face, then left. By the time we got there, it had already left. Just to be sure, we lined the doors and windows with salt. I had read somewhere that salt kept stuff away. We never heard from this thing again. To this day, I have no idea what it was. We've been back to the tower several times since, but it's never been the same. The woods have always seemed quiet and afraid. Anybody that has been on a Navajo reservation has either probably heard of some creepy things or have experienced pretty creepy things, namely skinwalkers. I have only seen one. Here's my story. I come from a small town in northern Arizona that's sandwiched between Paiute Reservation to the north and the US's largest Navajo reservation to the south. My high school being so small, a 1A high school that has on average 80 students enrolled every year, always had to travel south about 5 to 10 hours one way to play another high school in any sport. This means that we traveled a lot on the Navajo reservation. And we also usually stayed at hotels when we would head out to play and come home in the morning. But this trip was a little bit different. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put up the teams in a hotel that trip, so we were going to be on the road for a total of about 12 hours. I was the only male senior to play basketball that season. We had just got done playing our game and headed home on our bus, Big Blue. We headed out, and it wasn't long, about 2 hours of driving, before we entered the reservation. By this time, everyone was asleep, with it being about 2 in the morning. When we had crossed the reservation's border, I noticed a bus driver had sped up and was now going about 85 miles per hour. I thought this was a little weird, because he has never exceeded the speed limit, at least not in my high school career. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my teammates, and I just sat at the back of the bus staring out across the desolate desert landscape that was lit up by the full moon. As I looked out, I could see a figure running towards the bus at an angle of pursuit and keeping up with the bus at 85 miles per hour. As the figure got closer, I saw that it was a humanoid form. As a matter of fact, it looked exactly like a human, only that the face was painted half black and half white with glowing eyes. Glowing eyes like a rabbit's eyes reflecting from a spotlight. I immediately thought, holy crap, it's a skinwalker. The skinwalker ran up to the edge of the road and just kept up pace with the bus, hurdling sagebrush and rocks while staring at me. After I made eye contact with the thing, I could not look away. It was as if someone was holding my head and eyes in place. The skinwalker just smiled at me, this inhuman smile that went ear to ear, showing crooked, yellow, pointed teeth. It felt like I was going to throw up, and I was panicking through the whole ordeal. The skinwalker started to crumble down on all fours, still keeping up with the bus. I could see his bones crack and reform. Hair started appearing all over the skinwalker's body, and in about 3 seconds was now a coyote, and it ran off back into the desert out of view. As soon as it was gone, I ran to the onboard bathroom and puked a mixture of food and blood. I didn't want to tell anyone for fear they would think I was crazy. I confided in my Navajo friend. She told me that I needed to see the chief, who also happened to be a friend of mine, and get a blessing. I saw him the next day in a parking lot. He just came up to me, mumbled something in Navajo while waving a feathered scepter-like thing, turned around, got in his truck, and drove away. To this day, I haven't seen another skinwalker. It might be due to the fact I moved away from that town and reservation, and if I do have to go south, I go around, way around.